Vanessa Ricci-Thode is a Halloween enthusiast and a bookish geek who loves dragons, dogs, astronomy, and travel. If she's not hibernating, find her in her butterfly garden, achieving her final form as a garden witch. She lives in Waterloo, no, the other one, with her spouse, daughter, and very good dogs. Vanessa, take it away.
Hello. Yes, I'm Vanessa. So I'm reading the fourth book from my Queer Dragon Rider series. It's basically How to Train Your Dragon meets The Legend of Korra with firebending dragon riders. Each book in the series starts with a synopsis, so you can jump in anywhere. The series has 3 MCs, and the scene I'll be reading from features the youngest, Spark, who is friends with a dragon named Abyss and has just bartered her blacksmithing skills for dragon riding lessons from the new riders she's just met. So let's go. Raya first convinced Dragon, who was a lovely teal with ribbons of forest green, to let her show Spark the ropes, or scales. They spent the rest of the morning climbing along his back, Raya showing Spark how to use his spikes for handholds, and both of them occasionally falling off, Spark falling off a little more frequently, and needing to be caught by a patient Ice, who was on hand to observe. "You're lucky with Abyss if she'll let you do this," Raya said as Ice deposited Spark next to her. "It's easier to get used to the technique on the males. Their spikes are smaller and closer together, but the females are so much bigger. If you stick to their spines as much as you can, falling doesn't have to mean falling off." They broke for lunch, and then Ice tolerated Spark climbing around with Eltier. Barlow's dragon, a scarlet male with black tips, who he called Flame, had come to watch on as well. After the second time Flame set Spark back on Ice's shoulder, Abyss and Zephyr came down from the city. Zephyr circled overhead while Abyss watched silently beside Ice. "Let's race," Eltier said, a spark in his eyes. "See who can get to the other side of her wings first." Spark shrugged, and they each stood on either side of the ridges that made up Ice's spine. Eltier counted it down, and they both dashed off. Raya was right that it was far easier on Ice than it had been on Dragon. That didn't mean Spark was any good at it. She did a lot of tripping and stumbling and nearly fell off despite the extra width of the Dragoness. Eltier got to the other side of Ice's wings ages ahead of Spark. "Once you get your footing, then you can go from dragon to dragon," Raya called from Dragon's back. He extended his wings like he would if he was gliding, and Raya raced across the top of one and hopped off to land on Ice's back. Spark stared. "And you do all this while you're flying?" "Let's try it," Abyss said, leaning her head closer. Raya and Eltier stared wide-eyed at her. Barlow gasped. "The day's wonders never cease," Raya said. Abyss plucked Spark from Ice's back and dropped Spark onto her shoulder. Spark jogged from Abyss's shoulder to the base of her tail and back again. "Hold on." Abyss gave her only a moment to wedge herself between 2 spikes before taking off into the air, crying out. The other 3 dragons shrieked from behind her, chasing after Abyss. This call Spark recognized as the one she thought of as their play call. Smaller and faster, Dragon and Flame zipped by and circled overhead. Raya jumped from Dragon's shoulder to Flame's wing as both dragons passed by. Spark glanced down and couldn't quite bring herself to leave her semi-secure spot. She watched on, utterly transfixed, as Raya raced down Flame's back while he pitched into a loop. Barlow scuttled over Flame's shoulder to his underside as it became his overside, but Raya was quick and stayed ahead of the loop until she reached the tip of his tail, where she grabbed the spikes and swung herself out to drop onto Abyss's back. She stood next to Spark near the base of Abyss's neck, her body swaying as she shifted her balance to accommodate how Abyss moved while she flew. Raya called out, "Sorry, mistress. I should have asked first if you minded an extra passenger." Abyss shook, just a little twitch. It was enough to send Raya, laughing gleefully, sailing out into the clear skies and nearly dislodge Spark from her safe place. Spark turned in time to see Zephyr snatch Raya, who was still laughing, and drop her back onto Dragon. "Try," Abyss said. Zephyr dove under them to circle where Flame was. The settlement was a tiny blot far below, the glittering dragon city just above them. Spark took a deep breath. It wouldn't be the first time she'd fallen off a dragon. She stood, wobbled, inched along, getting a feel for how Abyss moved, how the wind pushed and pulled her. Dragon drew closer, and Raya cheered Spark on. Spark went slowly, but kept watching the others. Eltier jumped from Ice to Dragon and met Raya in the middle of his back. They pretended to spar until Raya grabbed his shoulders and pitched him off Dragon, cackling all the while. Eltyr landed on Flame, and Ice swooped past a moment later, snatching him up as she went. Spark would have to figure out how to improve her balance on the ground before she had any hope of being any good at this. But when she reached Abyss's wings, she turned and sprinted toward her shoulders. Crosswinds took her by surprise, and she tumbled, bouncing off one of Abyss's spikes and rolling down her back. Spark scrabbled, fingers brushing a ridge before she sailed out into the open sky. The wind was fierce, whipping around her, tugging at her clothes and pinwheeling her as she fell. She saw the shimmer of the Dragon City, searing blue skies, the green valley floor, glittering red rock. They all swirled past, and Spark had to squeeze her eyes shut against the chaotic riot of color. All while she still held her breath against a scream and tensed her body, waiting. Someone will catch me, someone will catch me, someone. Abyss spiraled back around and caught Spark in her claws. Spark's heartbeat slammed into her ears, and she panted. Raya called for Spark to come over to Dragon. Spark didn't think she could move just yet, but Abyss helped her along, picking her up and dropping her in next to Raya. Let's do something that looks harder than it is, Raya suggested. She whistled to Dragon, and he changed course to glide about 10 feet up from Abyss. The memory of jumping from Zephyr to save Abyss from the ice dragons overtook Spark's thoughts, and she shuddered. She could almost feel the tenderness in her ribs again and the hot rage coursing through her. She took a steadying breath against it. I've done this once before, Spark said, her voice small. She took another breath to steel herself. Let's see if I can do a better job of it this time. At least she didn't have broken ribs to worry about. She edged around Dragon's side, clinging to his spikes, until she had a good view of Abyss's wings. Then she leapt. She hit her mark, but didn't have anything to grab onto, no spikes on the wings, and lost her footing. The wind took her. She slid, not graceful in the least, as she raked her hands along the wing membrane, and then Spark slid out into the sky, where Zephyr waited to catch her. They tried it twice more, until Spark, nowhere near approaching graceful, landed on the wing and managed to scramble to Abyss's body and find something to hold on to. Spark couldn't believe the stunts the other three pulled with ease. She wondered at exactly what they'd been able to do when they'd had Raya's brother and his aeromancy to buoy them. The sun had sunk near the horizon by the time the dragons left the humans on the ground outside the big workshop. Spark was startled by how much time had passed. The other three laughed and joked with each other while Spark watched Abyss disappear into the city. Well, that was the best money I've ever spent on weapons repairs, Eltyr said, a chuckle in his voice. We need to find more places that will trade like this. Take me up again to practice more, and I'll temper all of your gear, Spark said. Raya laughed and clapped her on the back. That's the spirit, eh? We'll make a dragon walker out of you yet. Spark felt light, like a dandelion fluff on the breeze, and she practically skipped back to her house. So that's it. Thanks for listening. If you want more, I'm giving away the whole series, so be sure to enter the giveaway, and I'll post my socials in the chat.